As you guys know on this channel, I have often ventured into some different areas when making content, and I've done a lot of openings and reviews and talking about other stuff, but I wanted to be a little bit more creative from time to time, and if you've been following the channel for a while, you know I've played Yu-Gi-Oh! For a long time. I recently started playing Magic about a year ago, and still kind of play both games, although I have to admit I have found Magic to be a bit more fun in the past year or so, just due to like overall format health and Commander being more enjoyable, but that's kind of what inspired me to take the idea of existing Yu-Gi-Oh cards, iconic ones, and trying to make them into Magic the Gathering cards. Now, this is not like a groundbreaking concept. I'm certain this has been done before, but it was a lot of fun to do, and if people like it and want to see more of it, I'm definitely happy to do that, whether it's themed videos, like taking like an archetype or existing things, turning them into Magic the Gathering, and then maybe even the other way at some point, like designing Yu-Gi-Oh cards off of existing Magic the Gathering things. So that's what this video is, to give you a brief intro. Let's get into it. Alright guys, thanks so much for checking out the channel. Before we actually get started showing off the cards and sort of talking about what I'm doing here, if you guys do enjoy the video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Click the bell icon if you want to stay notified. It really does help, of course, to have you guys watching the videos. And let me know in the comments what you think. You know, do you hate this? Do you like this? Do you find some of the cards to be cool? Obviously, any and all feedback is appreciated. So, starting us off with, one of the most iconic Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time, the Dark Magician. Now, I was debating when I was making this, like, do I just pick random cards that I like? Do I pick some classic cards that people might see and be like, oh, this is kind of interesting to see the take? I ended up going with a little bit of a mixture, but I did try to stay towards either protagonist monsters or things that people were familiar with as a whole, just because I think that's going to be the best way to sort of introduce this series. And if it is something people enjoy, then we kind of dabble with it a little bit more. So Dark Magician, of course, level 7 Dark Spellcaster. Nothing crazy about him. He's got tons of support, but, you know, making him a vanilla and Magic would make him essentially unplayable, so I didn't want to do that. I thought, how can we make Dark Magician into a Magic card? So this is what we've got. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Magic and you're just watching this as a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, I'll try to briefly explain the key words, but I'm not going to explain the rules of Magic as a whole. I just find that would take a ton of time, and, obviously we don't want this video to be like an hour long, so our Dark Magician here costs 2 and 2 black, so it's going to be a total of 4 mana. It is a legendary creature, meaning he could be your commander if you're playing in commander format, but it also means you can't control multiple if you were playing him in another format. We're giving him hexproof and vigilance. As a spellcaster, of course, it would make sense thematically that, he'd be protected from spells in some capacity, and hexproof, for those of you unfamiliar, is basically he can't be targeted by an opponent's card effects, and vigilance means that when he attacks, he doesn't have to tap. As we've given him a lower attack of 2 versus a higher toughness of 5, I thought vigilance was worthwhile, especially because of the ability we're trying to give him. So, Dark Magic Attack, this is his sort of italicized keyword ability. When Dark Magician enters the battlefield, or any player casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Dark Magician. Then deal 1 damage to target creature an opponent controls equal to the number of counters on him. The reasoning behind this, of course, is that, Dark Magician is a powerful force when he comes out. So you play him, he gets a +1/+1 counter. That would give him a total of 3 attack, and you could just deal 1 damage to a target creature. But it puts pressure on your opponents in later turns because you're able to get them to, they're pretty much going to play cards. Either you're putting pressure on them not to play non-creatures, or they're going to play them anyway. You're going to get buffed, and you're going to be able to ping some of their creatures and take them out, while also being target-proof. He is a little bit higher in cost for his stats, but because he can be buffed up pretty quickly, I thought that was a pretty fair compromise for him. Next up, of course, Digbeak, an iconic card from a turbo pack and a tournament pack, I think. Tournament pack 6, if I remember correctly, with iconic flavor text that states, "This beast coils like a snake and strikes quickly with its snapping beak." You can clearly see the intimidating look on his face there. What would Digbeak look like as a card? So, of course, Magic does have a lot of lower cost common and uncommon cards, but I wanted Digbeak to kind of encapsulate his appeal here. So this Digbeak the Coiling Snapper, as it were, is 1 and a green with haste, which means he can attack the turn he comes into play. Unlike Yu-Gi-Oh, creatures that are summoned in Magic do have summoning sickness, meaning they cannot attack on their first turn unless they have haste or another, exception to the rule, which is just generally going to be haste. When Digbeak dies, draw up 1 card, then discard 1 card unless you pay a green. So he dies, you do get to replace him, but you're discarding, so there's hand filtering. If you're a little bit ahead in the game, you can pay a green to not have to discard that card. And then we've given Digbeak the ability to tap himself to tap target creature an opponent controls with power 2 or greater to sort of encapsulate his quick striking. He taps himself to get out of the way and prevents another creature from swinging, you know, kind of just thematically making sense in that regard. So Digbeak, of course, a lower rarity card, maybe less recognizable, but we wanted to get a mix of things in here, and I actually think this might be a decent card as a whole for some green decks, just as hand fixing and the ability to tap some problematic cards. Now, Stardust Dragon, of course, a lot more thematically accurate. This is Yusei's Ace Monster. Definitely a really good Yu-Gi-Oh card for a long time. Even now, it's not the worst card ever made. It's just been severely outclassed because it does sort of negate destruction, and destruction has become such a thing of the past. It's, you know, banishing, it's spinning, it's tributing. There's all kinds of different ways to get over things that aren't destruction, which wasn't the case when Stardust first came out. So I wanted to make Stardust playable, but also not, you know, as outclassed immediately right off the bat. So this is our Stardust Dragon. Now, I think blue and white are the best colors for him, white being flying, blue being sort of the dragon, sort of elemental energy type approach. Of course, you know, the colors in Magic are a little bit different, and blue is usually associated with countering or negating, which Stardust definitely does. So he is a legendary dragon that costs X, 2 white, and a blue to bring out, and says permanents you control have Ward 2. What that means is anytime your opponent wants to target any permanent you control, which is any card that is going to be staying out on the board, whether it's a land, a creature, an artifact, etc., they have to pay 2 mana or they can't do it. So that's our Stardust sort of offering that bit of protection while getting a bit of a buff in terms of like his application. Stardust Dragon enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, meaning you can cast X as 1, he comes out with 1, you can cast it as 2, you pay 5 mana, he comes out with 2, so on and so forth. And he's got, if Stardust Dragon would be dealt damage, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from it to prevent that damage. So there is the destruction prevention. I didn't want to make it blanket across all cards because I thought that would be kind of too powerful. But, you know, you can kind of pick and choose with what works best there. And then he has Eternalize 3 for 1 white or 1 blue. What that means is if he's in your grave, you pay 4 mana, including 1 white or 1 blue, and you make a copy of Stardust that is a token. It comes out, and of course it would still give those permanents that protection. This is sort of meant to capitalize on Stardust Dragon's revival ability, while also not making it too overpowered in terms of, like, giving it constant regeneration. I think this is a really balanced card and one I like a lot. It does kind of capture Stardust Dragon as a whole while sort of making it more relevant competitively than it would be otherwise, and I think that's really what you are looking for when designing cards. You know, this sort of feels like it would be about as strong as Stardust himself was back then, and would probably be a pretty cool commander due to his ease of summoning and things that could take advantage of him. Now, number 39, Utopia, another Ace Monster, of course, Yuma's Ace Monster that's gotten 1,000 different reprints and forms. And if you guys do enjoy this series, I definitely could see a scenario where we take a bunch of Utopia cards and make a bit of a tribal archetype with them. Certainly something to consider, because that is a large card pool to choose from. Utopia negates attacks, destroyed if it has no material. Pretty easy to summon, was good when it came out for being generic, but it's, you know, again, really outclassed nowadays. Battle doesn't really do too much anymore. So how can I create Utopia in Magic? Here we have Utopia, the Light of Hope. He costs 2 colorless and 3 white mana for a total of 5, but you may pay 3 and tap 2 untapped creatures you control with converted mana cost 4 or less rather than pay the spell's mana cost. What that means is converted mana cost is the total mana cost in a number. So for example, with Utopia, it would be 5, 2 colorless plus the 3 white. So the idea here is, of course, mimicking the overlaying with 2 level 4 monsters. If you were to tap 2 creatures whose converted mana costs are 4 or less, you then only pay 3 white and you bring out Utopia for less. If one or more creatures would deal combat damage to you or a permanent you control, you could pay 1 for each of those creatures to prevent that damage. This is akin to Utopia detaching a material to negate an attack, but a little bit better in terms of that application. And because Utopia is self-destroying, and in Magic that type of mechanic is really not going to work when you're focusing on a card as a commander, once each turn you may sacrifice a non-land permanent, draw a card. So it's a strong once per turn in terms of being able to do that, but it does give you a bit more draw power and allows Utopia to be a bit more of a powerhouse force overall. So I'm really trying to like capture the spirit of the card while also making it playable in a different game, and I think this is a pretty solid comparison. Next up, Blue Eyes White Dragon, arguably the most iconic Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time, up there with Dark Magician Girl. Another normal monster, but definitely a really powerful creature that's, like, iconic and people love it. So how do I encapture that without, you know, making it just a vanilla, because it wouldn't even be remotely playable? Blue Eyes White Dragon with that sweet Rush Duel artwork for the record. I had to make him pretty big because Blue Eyes is, you know, big both literally and figuratively, so 5 colorless, 2 white, and a blue, so he costs 8 to bring out, but he has Vigilance, which means he does not tap to attack, and Indestructible, because of course he is virtually invincible, and very few have faced him and lived to tell the tale. It does sort of, Indestructible means any destruction effects, any battle destruction is non-applicable. He also has protection from black, because he's a blue, sort of light, white-blue, light-ish creature, like, meaning any black effects, attack damage, or anything of the sort from a spell that is black will not affect him at all. And then his one-off ability, White Lightning, whenever Blue Eyes attacks, you may destroy target non-land, non-creature permanent, which would mean like an artifact or an enchantment that is in play. You don't really want him to be too strong because he's already unkillable in a lot of ways and vigilant, but being able to out-problem artifacts or enchantments is definitely cool. I think this captures Blue Eyes pretty well, and because he's a dragon, a lot of existing Magic support would combo with him. I made him blue-white because he's literally blue and white, so it sort of fit, but otherwise I thought about making him mono white. I just decided to go with the mixed color because I wanted to kind of make him a little bit more usable there. Again, Blue Eyes is another archetype that has a lot of really cool cards. Would definitely be neat to see what types of concepts we could come up with. For a spell that's always been pretty powerful, but maybe isn't on the same level of nostalgia, Emergency Teleport. Of course, special summon a level 3 or lower Psychic from your deck, but banish it during the end phase. I went pretty basic on this one. Emergency Teleport, of course, costs 3, either white or black. It's a mix, so you can do whatever you like in terms of the combinations, and it is an instant, which means it can be cast during either player's turn or at any time. Search your library for a white or black creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Exile that creature at the beginning of the next end step, which in Magic means the beginning of your end step at the end of your turn, unless you play this card during an opponent's turn. Obviously, Magic has a much larger card pool, and there are different things that you can bring out, but limiting it to white or black and 3 or less kind of plays into the whole idea of level 3. There's not really a Psychic type in Magic, so I had to make some reasonable accommodations towards the playability of the card, but I do think it sort of does what Emergency Teleport would do, and I think a card like this is potentially too broken for Magic. I'm really not sure, because I obviously can't like sit here and play test these at the moment, but a card like this, being able to grab any white or black creature with 3 or less is, you know, 3 mana feels like a fair cost. I'm just not 100% sure what the card pool would really be for that, so there is a risk of, you know, being overpowered. So next up, Red Eyes Black Dragon, one of my favorite vanillas, and obviously Joey's original. Had to do this one too because we really needed a red card in this mix. So Red Eyes Black Dragon with amazing art by Kazuki Takahashi, of course, may he rest in peace. Really kind of encapsulates the look of a Magic card. There's not a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh art that really meets that threshold in the same way, but this one definitely does. So for Red Eyes, we wanted to make him powerful. He costs 3 colorless, a black, a red, and then either a black or red, so whatever you're feeling at the time. When you cast Red Eyes Black Dragon, exile target non-land permanent. That's any permanent in play that's not a land. Exiling is a really powerful form of removal because it is akin to banishing in Magic. So you play Red Eyes, you banish, and it's worth the heavy cost that you're bringing to put him out. He has Molten Fireball. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Red has a lot of instants and sorceries. It's definitely a big thematic element of it. I didn't want to make it possible to damage the opponent because you could definitely stack up damage really quick there, but being able to deal with problematic creatures or planeswalkers when you're casting those definitely makes Red Eyes worth bringing out, and you could certainly build around him as a commander. And of course, he has other dragons you control get +1/+1. He buffs your other dragons just to sort of give him a little bit of an added incentive. He is a 4/4, he's a little weak versus his mana cost, but I think his effects more than make up for it. Next up, we've got Silverfang, another iconic monster, one of Yugi's best monsters from, you know, maybe the first 2 episodes. Silverfang is, of course, really cool and not exactly playable, but I did want to go ahead and try my hand at making him, and so we look at Magic Silverfang. He's got 1 green, 1 red, and of course beautiful artwork from the Rush Duel. You can tell the slight differences. He is a wolf, and Magic has a large amount of wolves and werewolves as well as beasts, so I thought using him as a buff would be pretty cool. Other wolves, werewolves, and beasts you control gain +1/+2, so they get +1 power, +2 toughness. Legendary werewolves you control gain hexproof. When Silverfang dies, add 1 red and 1 green to your mana pool. So he replaces his cost once he dies, which sort of offsets any negatives that would come with him. If you're playing a commander format and you you have a werewolf that is a legendary commander, it would get hexproof, so you can bring out Silverfang as protection, and when he dies, you do get that mana replacement, and the buff is definitely pretty solid too. I almost worry that he might be best to cost one more, maybe a colorless, but this is what we put him with so far, so we'll see how it goes and what people think on the overall design. Monster Reborn, pretty straightforward. Don't need to say too much about that. Of course, reviving things in Magic can be super problematic if it's not done in a balanced fashion because you don't have to worry about mana cost. So I did go ahead and make Monster Reborn as best I could as a sorcery, so you're forced to play it during your turn. It's not a quick play spell. 5 mana, colorless to play. Return target creature from any graveyard to the battlefield under your control. It's pretty good, but it's also a little costly. I definitely think you can utilize this in a good way without it being too problematic. Madness 4 and 1 colorless means if you discard this card, discard it into exile. When you do, you may cast it for its madness cost or put it into your graveyard. So this is just to give Monster Reborn a little bit more flavor. If it's discarded for some reason to activate a card or effect, you can immediately cast it and sort of get an additional benefit from it. So it's pretty cool. I use the Monster Reborn art just because I think it looked a little bit more Magic the Gathering-esque, but it's a sorcery, it revives. You're not exactly reinventing the wheel here, but I think it's a pretty good comparison. Book of Moon, one of the best staples, really, of all time in Yu-Gi-Oh! And an iconic spell. How can I make Book of Moon when you can't flip things face down? Well, we go ahead and make it a card that I'm not too sure about here. This one I was on the fence in terms of whether or not it was actually good or if the mana cost was too high, but it's got Split Second, which means as long as this spell is on the stack, which is the equivalent of Chain Links in Yu-Gi-Oh!, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that are not mana abilities. What that means is you can't respond to it with other cards unless they are mana abilities where you're tapping to add mana, and generally that means you cannot negate this card. Exile target permanent and opponent controls until the beginning of the next end step. So you're temporarily banishing something an opponent controls, and Book of Moon's going to bring it back during the end phase. The reason I wonder if phasing it out is actually going to be like worth the 2 and a blue is that there are cards that do this for a lot less, but they don't have Split Second, so they can be countered, and this can allow you to pretty much guarantee that you're dealing with a problem card. So that's going to bring us back to the beginning. I know this video is a little bit different than some of the usuals, but I had a lot of fun making it. I'm really excited to see what you guys think. So definitely let me know in the comments down below if you want to see more videos like this, what you think of the card designs, and, you know, if you want to see a reverse version of it at some point too, Magic into Yu-Gi-Oh! And how we would do that balancing, because that could be a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.